What if I told you World War I could have ended in 1916 with a German victory, simply because of one man's choices? Woodrow Wilson, criticized by some historians for his diplomatic naivete, missed a critical opportunity that might have altered history's course like a row of falling dominoes. The missed diplomatic opportunities of 1916. What if a single peace conference in 1916 could have changed the fates of millions? As the bloodiest conflict in human history up to that point dragged on, both the Allied and Central Powers were approaching a breaking point that history books often gloss over. By December 1916, after 2.5 years of brutal fighting, the window for peace had cracked open just enough to glimpse an alternate future, one where the war might have ended 2 years earlier. The autumn of 1916 marked a critical moment when both sides were secretly willing to negotiate. Britain was facing financial collapse, spending an astronomical $5.21 million per day on the war effort, while their gold reserves depleted and London bankers panicked. JP Morgan executives began refusing further loans without American government guarantees. This economic desperation forced military powers to consider peace when battlefield victory seemed increasingly remote. German leadership watched their ally Austria-Hungary unravel beneath the pressure of sustaining a multi-front war. In villages and cities across Europe, civilians rationed food, mourned dead sons, and gazed at empty factory benches once occupied by men now buried in foreign fields. The war had become a broken bank that kept withdrawing lives while returning only grief. This precarious situation prompted both sides to send discreet peace feelers toward American President Woodrow Wilson. The Germans made their first move on December 12th with their peace note, while the British quietly signaled openness through diplomatic back channels. Wilson had positioned himself as the world's mediator since the war's outset, but his moment of greatest potential influence revealed how a single misstep could alter history. Instead of immediately calling for a ceasefire and neutral peace conference, Wilson allowed himself to be swayed by strongly pro-British advisors. Colonel Edward House, his closest confidant, had developed such intimate relationships with British leadership that his objectivity had vanished. Secretary of State Robert Lansing similarly believed American interests aligned with an Allied victory. The tragedy deepened as evidence later revealed German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg's genuine preparedness for compromise. Secret diplomatic cables showed his willingness to restore Belgian independence and consider territorial compromises. The Kaiser himself, in private letters that revealed his growing personal disillusionment, wrote of his concern about the continuing slaughter of the best men of all nations. Wilson's diplomatic failure culminated in his tone-deaf peace note on December 18th that asked both sides to state their war aims publicly, alienating both camps and strengthening hardliners. This miscalculation enabled German military leaders to push for unrestricted submarine warfare while Britain's war cabinet demanded total victory. The human cost was staggering. 5.4 million additional lives lost in the war's final 2 years. A devastating Spanish flu pandemic spreading through weakened populations, and the harsh Versailles terms that planted seeds for extremism and another world war just 2 decades later. The tank. How earlier innovation could have tipped the scales. Beyond the diplomatic blunders that prolonged the war, a single technological misjudgment may have cost Germany its chance at victory. By the time German engineers rolled out their first A7V tanks in 1918, the Allies had already deployed thousands. Yet, ironically, German industry possessed greater steel production and mechanical expertise than their enemies throughout most of the conflict. The tank revolutionized the Great War by breaking the bloody stalemate of trench warfare. When British tanks first appeared at the Somme in 1916, they shocked German defenders who had never seen such machines before. Despite their slow speed and mechanical issues, these armored vehicles could cross trenches, crush barbed wire, and withstand machine gun fire. The German High Command's response was surprisingly dismissive. General Erich Ludendorff called tanks interesting technical curiosities with very little military value. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong. While German officers focused on improving defensive capabilities, the Allies rapidly enhanced their tank technology. Like a runner who refuses to start until half the race is over, Germany's delayed entry into tank development surrendered a critical advantage they could never regain. What makes this oversight particularly baffling is the German industrial capacity was perfectly suited for tank production. The Krupp works at Essen had been manufacturing heavy artillery and armored vehicles for decades. Their engineers possessed unmatched expertise in metallurgy and mechanical systems. As historian Peter Hart noted, the German failure to recognize the potential of tanks wasn't a matter of capability, but of military imagination. The 1915 Hindenburg program represents this failure in concrete terms. This massive industrial mobilization redirected Germany's manufacturing toward war production, but focused primarily on artillery and aircraft rather than developing armored vehicles. This misallocation of resources meant Germany missed the opportunity to deploy effective tanks by mid-1916, potentially ahead of the British. By the time Germany finally produced tanks, the Allies had established overwhelming numerical superiority. British tanks, over 2,600. French tanks, more than 3,800. German A7V tanks, only 20. The A7V itself was impressive, weighing 33 tons, carrying a crew of 18, and mounting a 57mm gun that outclassed early British tanks. But the first major German tank attack occurred at Villers-Bretonneux in April 1918, far too late to turn the tide. Had Germany deployed tanks at Verdun in 1916, when French forces were stretched to breaking point, the psychological impact alone might have been devastating. With no effective anti-tank weapons yet developed, French lines might have collapsed completely. The mathematical equation was simple. Tanks plus stormtrooper tactics equals breakthrough. When Germany finally combined these elements in 1918, they achieved significant advances, but lacked resources to exploit them. The ultimate irony is that Germany's eventual tank doctrines would revolutionize warfare in the next World War. General Heinz Guderian, who witnessed British tanks at Cambrai in 1917, later wrote, "If we had recognized the potential of armored warfare earlier, the outcome of the Great War might have been entirely different." Unrestricted submarine warfare, the double-edged sword. Germany's failure with tanks represents a tactical error, but their naval strategy crossed into the realm of strategic catastrophe. Consider this paradox. The very weapon that gave Germany its best chance of victory, the U-boat, also guaranteed their defeat when used without restraint. The five-word order, sink all ships without warning, may have cost Germany the war. On January 31, 1917, Germany made one of the most consequential decisions of the entire conflict. Kaiser Wilhelm II, pressured by military leadership desperate for a breakthrough, approved the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. German U-boats would torpedo any vessel, military or civilian, neutral or belligerent, in designated war zones without warning. The logic appeared sound. Britain, an island nation dependent on imports, would face starvation if its maritime supply lines were severed. Admiral Hennig von Holzendorf, chief architect of this strategy, boldly predicted Britain would collapse within 5 months, well before American forces could intervene. "I guarantee that no American will set foot on the continent," Holzendorf assured the Kaiser, revealing how profoundly German leadership misjudged both Britain's resilience and America's industrial capacity. The decision was especially reckless considering Germany had already experienced the consequences of unrestricted submarine warfare. The 1915 Lusitania disaster, where a German torpedo sent 1,198 souls, including 128 Americans, into the cold, unforgiving Atlantic depths, generated worldwide horror. The international backlash had forced Germany to restrict its submarine campaign, yet remarkably, they returned to this provocative policy less than 2 years later. The German calculation balanced precariously on a dangerous assumption. Britain would collapse before American intervention could matter. Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg, opposing the unrestricted campaign, warned prophetically, "If the U-boat war fails, then we are lost." Initially, the strategy proved devastating. In April 1917 alone, U-boats sank 430 ships totaling to 852,000 tons, reducing Britain's food reserves to 6 weeks' supply. The fatal miscalculation became apparent almost immediately. On April 6, 1917, just 2 months after the campaign began, the United States declared war on Germany. President Wilson found American neutrality impossible to maintain as German torpedoes turned neutral shipping into floating graveyards. The sleeping giant had awakened. A more discriminating approach, targeting military vessels while sparing passenger liners and neutral shipping, might have kept America neutral. US public opinion remained deeply divided on intervention, with strong isolationist sentiment throughout the Midwest. By late 1917, Britain implemented an effective convoy system that dramatically reduced shipping losses. Meanwhile, American industry began what historian A.J.P. Taylor called the greatest contribution to Allied victory, an unprecedented flood of supplies, food, and financial support that reinvigorated the exhausted Allies. The US extended over $7 billion in loans to Britain and France, effectively underwriting their war effort. Without American entry, the war's outcome would likely have favored Germany. France's army was severely depleted, Russia was collapsing into revolution, and Britain approached financial ruin. Germany's U-boat gamble thus transformed potential victory into certain defeat. Conclusion. As we've seen, World War I balanced on countless knife edges. Tiny course corrections in diplomacy, technology, or strategy could have radically altered the 20th century's bloodiest chapters. Different choices might have spared millions and prevented the conditions that later bred fascism and communist revolutions. History forms a complex web of human decisions, technological breakthroughs, and chance events, not a predetermined path. The Great War's alternate timelines mirror our own crossroads today. What knife edges do we balance on now? What seemingly minor choices might our descendants study a century from now? Perhaps in understanding history's fragility, we gain wisdom for navigating our uncertain present. Stay tuned.